Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to the School of Speech podcast, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. School of Speech is designed specifically for the school-based SLP to come together to discuss current topics, tackle difficult situations, and share our insights. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. Hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Carolyn Dolby, and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for School of Speech. School of Speech is designed for school-based SLPs, so we can come together and explore current trends, share some insights, and really champion our expertise. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and really foster that community, all of us that are dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. I'm so excited for today's episode, Comprehensive Evaluations for Speech, Language, and Reading Struggles. Today we have Anne Reed with us. She's going to help us tackle the challenges that our students face when they also struggle with reading. She's going to give us those key components of a comprehensive evaluation and share some insights into identifying at-risk students. She's going to give us some of those best practices when we're targeting interventions. As we settle in for another great episode, I have a little bit of housekeeping. Each of our episodes is 60 minutes and will be offered for one ASHA CEUs. I am going to go over our disclosures. Anne is a doctoral student funded by the Institute of Educational Sciences, U.S. Department of Education, through a grant to the Florida Center of Reading Research at Florida State University. Now, we do need to say that the opinions expressed here by Anne do not represent the views of the Institute or the U.S. Department of Education unless they're really good. Anne is receiving an honorarium from SpeechTherapyPD.com for her participation in today's episode. And she comes with no non-financial to disclose. For me, I'm a salaried employee of Portland Public Schools. I also receive compensation for my graduate courses I teach at the University of Houston. I'm also a consultant for school districts across the nation, supporting their program development and staff training in all things feeding and swallowing. And I also receive compensation from SpeechTherapyPD.com for hosting School of Speech, this absolute dream job. Can't believe I get to do this. Non-financial, I am still a member of TISHA, which is the Texas Speech and Hearing Associations. I've been on their feeding task force for several years. I volunteer for Feeding Matters, and I'm also an ASHA member of their special interest groups 13, 14, and 16, because I can't get enough. Enough about me. Let's know about Anne. Again, I think I already said she's a doctoral candidate in communication sciences and disorders in Florida. She's also a Fireflies Fellow with a focus on interdisciplinary studies of reading through the Florida Center of Reading Research. Anne's research interests include using an implementation science framework to study the effectiveness of services provided by SLPs in addressing challenges faced by students with speech, language, and reading difficulties. Now, drawing from her extensive professional background, which has encompassed over 20 years, we're not aging you, her experience as both school-based SLP, as well as the roles that she has played within private clinics, and also a specialized school for students with dyslexia. Anne is bringing us a wealth of practical insights to her academia and her clinical pursuits. Welcome, Anne. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
I am so intrigued to know your journey. What led you to really focus on reading difficulties and struggles? Where did that come from?
Sure, sure. Lots of years and lots of different settings. But when I was working in a clinic in Georgia, the owner of the clinic wanted me to be trained in Orton Gillingham, which is a systematic multisensory methodology for teaching reading. And I agreed. She paid for it. And then, I worked in the clinic for a certain amount of time to pay her back. But it was through that training that I met the assistant director of the Skank School, which is a specialized school for students with dyslexia in Atlanta. And the assistant director, Rosalie Davis, was the teacher of all of their training courses. And so I was trained, went back to my clinic, was working with students, and got a call from Rosalie one day, kind of out of the blue, asking me if I would come in and talk to her and the director of the school about possibly coming and working there. They had contracted their services out for years and years and years, but had just done a big renovation and had more space than they had ever had and planned to bring those services in-house for their students. So I went in and talked with them and just was amazed, and oh my gosh, this opportunity sounds too good to be true. I mean, Skank is known throughout the Southeast. You may not be aware in Oregon, but Skank is known throughout the Southeast for the work that it does for students with dyslexia.
You're saying Skank? I want to make sure.
I am saying it's Skank, but it's spelled S-C-A.
Sorry, I have the humor of a junior high boy. Okay, it is what it is, people.
E-N-C-K, yes. The founder, David Skank, the school was founded in the 50s. And so that pronunciation didn't have the connotation that it has today, but
I love it.
It honors the founder. Anyway, took the job, worked there for 8 years, created their speech and language program and everything that they do on behalf of students. It was a wonderful opportunity. What I loved most about it was getting to collaborate with the teachers and being in the classrooms every day, seeing the kids working on goals that were relevant to what they were doing in the classroom. I thought that was so valuable, but also kind of being able to do what I felt like maybe I couldn't do in a regular school setting or a public school setting. I was like, we're going to do speech sound disorders this way, and we're only going to work 5 days a week when it's appropriate, and pull the kids out of class real quick in the hallway and get them back into class. Their parents are paying way too much money for them to be out of class for half an hour for me to have them practice speech sounds or whatever. Just lots of opportunities to really innovate in the way that services were delivered. But one of the things that I took away from my 8 years there were the stories of the families that came to Skank. Often when students came, they felt like they had been failed by their local schools and their public schools, either because they felt like no one heard them, or that the difficulties they were seeing were not recognized, or if they were recognized, people in the schools just kind of threw up their hands. Well, we don't really know what to do, or we can't do what you're asking, and so not our problem. And so some of those stories were just heartbreaking, or, children that were in schools that weren't so great and came on scholarship, and just the stories were so impactful for me. But so I transitioned back into public education after those 8 years because my son was getting to be school age. And it was that transition that really was the catalyst to bring me where I am today. I went from being very collaborative in the work that I was doing to being in a very large school that there were as many kindergartners in the school that I moved to as there were all of the students at Skank.
Oh, so that's a big change.
Very big change. Skank was 250. So very big. And the work that people did was very siloed. And so that was disheartening for me, to not be able to collaborate in the way that I knew, would be keep me invigorated, keep teachers invigorated, but also be helpful for the students that we worked with. I found my little pockets here and there of the people, but in a school that size, it's just difficult to make that happen. And the other thing that was disheartening was the process to special education was often difficult for families due to the litigious climate that the particular district that I worked in, I think kind of the metro Atlanta area may have more of a litigious feel to it than maybe some less densely populated areas. And that just kind of became a barrier for families. I could tell there were families that felt like teachers weren't honest with them because they were fearful of, or you maybe just don't give all the things that you
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Sometimes, we're scared to say things.
Yeah. Or we had the off family here or there that used the full weight of what they could threaten. And so then it just became hard, and you feel bad for the child because they're often the one that is caught in the middle. And that was just so difficult. But, I had a very hard but very great experience my first year with one of those families. And I leaned in really hard to help this mom understand I'm not here to fight you on anything. I am here for us to work together, benefit of your child. And, it was a hard year, but by the end of the year, I think she came around and saw the benefit that could be. It was just that one year, and then the child moved on. But, you have to hold on to those wins. And then, the other thing I took away from that transition back is that sometimes a student just needs that one person that will believe in them. I had a 4th and 5th grader that first year back that, mom knew there was something wrong with the 4th grader, and nobody would listen to her because she wasn't strong with how she communicated what she was seeing. And the child was one of those that just kind of floats under the radar. And so they go, well, the grades aren't that bad, so it's fine. But if you spent any time with the child and worked through some activities with the child, you would go, this is not, she can't be left to her own devices. Like something's missing here. And then another kid that, from a migrant family and maybe didn't have the resources, parents didn't have the resources to be able to get the child the help that they needed. And so it wasn't that he necessarily needed special education, but he just kind of got found eligible because he needed some other kind of support, some of that multi-tiered system of support that just wasn't available because they didn't understand the language differences, and he had got put in before I was there. So just, little things like that I was like, we can do better. And we as SLPs in school buildings have the knowledge to be able to speak into those situations and be in meetings and have important things to say that impact children's lives. And I came back to school, and I am here now because I want the next generation of SLPs to feel empowered to say the things that need to be said and to be the change, because I think we can do so much. So.
Okay, I can already feel your passion coming through. I love this. And really what you're saying is really kind of, actually, here's my first question, because you made me think about this. First part would be our evaluation, right? When you were just mentioning about a student that maybe came into SPED, maybe they need to come into SPED.
Yep.
So I think if we start off this discussion talking about a comprehensive evaluation, what do you consider key components in order to have a real robust, comprehensive eval?
Well, I think I think before you get to the point of an evaluation, right? So you've got this lead up to that parent signature for assessment. And so you've got, whether it's RTI, not everybody does RTI, but if your school, your district does some sort of intervention before an evaluation can be made, I think that's a great time for SLPs to start digging through the data, because regardless of when a child is kind of referred to you, that initial referral, they have data that comes with them. And whether it's kindergarten screening data, universal screening, progress monitoring, parent teacher conference notes, all of that information is so helpful in figuring out what has happened up until this point. If you've got parent teacher conferences and parents have mentioned, oh yeah, his brother had trouble learning to read, or his little sister didn't talk until she was 4. All those little things that sometimes pop up in those notes, that's important data. Or, if you've got an older child so in Georgia, they do RTI. And so let's say I've got a 4th grader that their name comes to me, and I'm looking at their universal screening data. And it looks like the same pattern every year. They start the year really low. They end the year making some good progress. And then summer happens, the next year rolls around, and it's like they forgot everything over the summer. They've got that typical summer slide. Well, if we see that multiple years in a row, I would argue that's a trend. That's a data point. That is something that in those student study team meetings, or whatever you want to call it in your district, like, that's information. Hey guys, what do we think about this? This doesn't seem natural to me for there to be this much of a drop off at the beginning of every year. He should be retaining a little bit more. Maybe we should do a little more work here to figure out what's happening. So I think there's some information ahead of that assessment that can be looked at. But when we talk about getting into the actual assessment, I think obviously, we all learn in graduate school, we're looking at fluency, we're looking at voice, we're looking at language, we're looking at speech sounds. But I would argue, if we're adding literacy to this equation and thinking about literacy, within all of those 4 areas, we need to be looking at it through the lens of literacy. And for example, when we talk about fluency and voice, yes, that's often an informal assessment. And, when you write that up in your report, fluency and voice informally assessed and judged to be within normal limits. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But if we're thinking about it through the lens of literacy, and we're listening to that child's conversation, are we hearing, like, we may not hear stuttering per se, but maybe we hear a child that's talking around words a lot. Maybe they're using lots of fillers. Maybe they're always kind of metacognitively thinking about how they can't find the word. So, for example, if they're telling you about their weekend, and they may say, we went to that place, and it has like all the seats, and they do this, and then we watched the movie. What movie did you watch? That one with the guy. And so it's just kind of very vague. We have trouble finding the right word. So they're experiencing word finding. Well, that's something to note. That could be a red flag for reading difficulties. Word finding difficulty is often one of the symptoms of students when you have a diagnosis of dyslexia. And then as we think about speech sound disorder, or speech sound production, we want to look at the typical things that we look at. We want to do some sort of standardized test, see what sounds they're making, what sounds they're not making. But we also want to ask the parents, ask the teachers. And I know sometimes, we get busy as we're doing things, and it's hard to I know I've forgotten to get that information before, or sometimes it's just a real quick, email to the teacher, hey, do you notice it? What do you notice? Or a real quick email to the parents, hey, what do you notice? But if we can kind of, what would be the word, streamline our processes and kind of make those procedures become more habitual for ourselves, I think it's helpful. There's a resource by McLeod and colleagues from 2012 that's a questionnaire about children's speech. It's translated into so many languages that's freely available. Maybe it's finding that resource, downloading the languages that are appropriate for your school, and just having that ready to go to send, to scan it or something and email it to parents, but so that you're getting information about how that child talks in lots of settings. But then we also want to use that same conversational sample that we use to informally judge fluency and voice, to also look at maybe doing like a percentage consonants correct. So we have our Goldman-Bristow score, but then maybe we're also seeing how many consonants correct do they perform in conversation, because that could look very different from a Goldman-Bristow, but they're two separate data sources that you can use.
Hey, Anne, can we go back? Because what was the reference you gave us?
So it's McLeod and colleagues, McLeod. And
let's write it in. It's MC. LEOD.
Yep. Sharon McLeod. I can send you the citation after this and the link to the resource. Yeah. And it's the articles from 2012 where they talk about it's probably in the supplemental materials. But yeah, so lots of different ways that we can get at the same information. One of the things recently, so I just published a paper on data sources that SLPs use to make eligibility decisions, and how things like self-efficacy and job satisfaction may influence the number of data sources that SLPs use. And on average, SLPs use 8 data sources to make eligibility decisions. And you hear that, you go, wow, that's a lot. But that's not just standardized tests, right? It's questionnaires that we give to teachers. It's the review of records. That is a data source. It's conversational samples. It's your oral mechanism exam. So all of those things together are giving you a picture of the child. So then if we want to move on to language and what we're doing for language, you want to start broad and then narrow down based on what you see at that bigger level. So we want to look at kind of those big areas: semantics and vocabulary, morphology, syntax. And then based on what we see within each of those areas, you're either going to do some additional testing to kind of see, can I confirm that this is happening consistently? Or maybe they just had a bad day. Maybe they were sleepy. I don't know. But so again, with language, starting broad and then moving more narrow as you look at what the child is giving you. Those would be, broadly what we want to do for a comprehensive assessment.
All right. Thank you. I kind of like you. I wrote it down because you kind of started talking about a red flag for reading disorder. And one, I know I heard word finding. What are some others as we're going through our evaluation? What should we be looking for?
Word finding obviously could be a red flag. I think anytime a child has difficulty, learning to read, so whether it's phonological awareness activities, phonemic awareness activities, letter identification, sound identification, like if they have trouble telling you that the sound at the beginning of a word, or if they have, if the teacher's like, it's just taking them way longer than everybody else in class. Like if you're thinking about kindergartners and kind of those milestones, they start presenting those letters and then they start building those words pretty quickly. And they're like, they still don't know their alphabet and it's Thanksgiving. I would say, we might want to pay attention and do a little something here. And surely, hopefully that teacher has already made the referral to to school psychologist or something, but sometimes we are the first thing that teachers do because they notice something like a speech sound difficulty. And so we come first. And so then it's up to us to talk to that teacher and ask those questions. Well, what's going on in the classroom? Tell me, they're like, it's just speech. Well, but tell me a little bit about what's going on in the classroom anyway. What is reading looking like? Universal screening at the beginning of the year. Can I see that? If you don't have access to it, please show me that data. Or, are they doing okay as you're learning to read? Do they have some trouble? Like, they're a little slow. Okay, tell me more about that. It's just all of those small little component parts. So we're looking at phonological awareness. We're looking at phonemic awareness. We're looking at letter identification. We're looking at sound identification, those beginning reading skills. And then also narrative language, I think, is a big one. For sometimes that narrative language can be a red flag for difficulty with reading. If you think about the sequential nature of narratives and the sequential nature of reading, I think those kind of mirror each other in how they develop in terms of that sequentialness. Thinking about those kids that can't tell you about what they did over the weekend, not because they can't find the words, but because the story's jumbled, or they can't give a clear picture of the main character in a story. Let's say you read a picture book with them and, okay, now you tell me the story, and you close the book and they're like, they don't know who the main character was, or if they do, they can't kind of put the pieces in the plot together for you. I think those are all, signs that we need to take a closer look.
Sorry, I'm just giving a shout out to Kiki to see Kiki. I'm so sorry. That was one of my an old student I had. Sorry, KK. Just seeing if she is seeing the chat. So sorry about that. I sort of like stopped for a minute just to answer her to see if she's seeing what's written in the chat or not. So I'm sorry. Anyway, I love when you said that when you're getting an eval, and I meant to say that, you mean when you were saying that, is to the teacher that says, it's just speech. And you said, well, tell me more. I understand that speech is there, but tell me more, because, right, it might not just be speech, people. And I love people. We all know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we are the gateway, we are the people. Well, because we are so knowledgeable and, and we have such a great presence. And so they do come to us.
And there are so many children that, like, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, they got in through the back door through speech and language. Like, they'll come to us first, and then, we end up working our magic on the fronts where we know what to do. And then they need more help because they're not reading. And so then they end up being found eligible for specific learning disability. And then they go on to receive more services. I think we need to be of the mindset that from the very beginning, whenever that beginning is for us and a child, that we are collecting an appropriate, not too much, like it's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? You want it to be just right, not too little, not too much, but just right. That we are collecting an appropriate amount of data and doing an appropriate amount of assessment, so that we can document for that child from the very beginning what has been hard, their strengths, their weaknesses, and it begins to lay the groundwork for the team later on, should that child need more. They can look back at this kid's IEPs for speech only and see, well, yeah, they only had articulation goals, but read those present levels. Wow. There were some other things that were struggling, and it looks like, maybe you write in those present levels, maybe you put in the meeting notes how you're working on articulation, but maybe in those meeting notes, you're explicitly saying, and we built in phonological awareness and phonemic awareness where we could to support this child's reading struggles. Yes, I had my goals. that were the appropriate goals that we were supposed to work on, or maybe we used literacy-based we did literacy-based therapy, and we used books in articulation therapy to encourage some of those skills. Or maybe we used spelling and writing, reading and writing, to build some of that skill as we were working on the articulation. Like, there are ways to dovetail those things to give kids a boost in those areas.
Great. I'm loving everything you're laying on us today. We've got Kimberly adding in, so many of their students have language and artic goals, but reading problems make treatment of these so very difficult.
Yes. Yes.
How do we?
Yeah, they do. And I think you've just got to figure out, have your goals and what you know needs to be addressed, and then figure out, I think, one of the best ways that we can support these students. Like, think about those older students, like third grade and above, that may have those speech and language goals. Maybe they are also SLD, so we are a secondary eligibility, and maybe they're still not a great reader. And in my experience, those kids often missed a lot of class and missed a lot of content because they were getting speech, or they might have been in the resource room. And yes, the resource teacher is working with the teacher to bring in that curriculum, but I still think it's hard for these kids to have to, like, their day is so segmented just because, you've got to get in all these different minutes of, everybody's got to get their time with the kid. And sometimes that's a little difficult. One of the ways that I really tried to approach this, Ashley Rossi from Sweet Southern Speech had, like, years ago, I saw on her Instagram and in her Teachers Pay Teacher store, she had these book companions that she would do for picture books. And so it covered, like, narrative structure of the book, it covered vocabulary, and the resource covered, like, reading comprehension, so comprehension questions. And I had the idea, I was like, well, that would be a neat idea, but let's do it for these kids that have speech language goals and still are struggling to read. Let me use it as kind of a pre-teaching tool for content. And so I did this with 4th and 5th grade. I took the social studies standards for 4th and 5th grade and looked at the big themes that were covered throughout the year. So in 4th grade, they're doing the Revolutionary War. Most of social studies revolves around the Revolutionary War. And so I took those topics and found picture books that address those topics and made book companions that went with these books, and made it a point to pre-teach. I used, like, this was our lesson plan, if you will. This is what I did in therapy to address their goals, but also to give them a preview of the content that was coming. So it was a preview of the content, pre-teaching. And so they were becoming familiar with the vocabulary that their teacher was going to be covering in class. They were familiar with the concepts that were going to be taught in class. Sometimes those kids with language disorders, it takes them a little longer to wrap their head around some of those more complex concepts, especially for history. That's, like, I have no concept of a covered wagon going across the West. What? I can't relate to that. So I would give them stories through these picture books to give them the preview of the material that would help them engage when it was time to teach the content in class. So I think that's a good way, and you can do that with language and with articulation. Pull your vocabulary out that has those sounds that you're working on, and build in those drill opportunities with the vocabulary from the book. Have them, writing about the book, have them spelling the vocabulary from the book. I think there are ways to work it in. It took me some time to develop the resource, but once it was made, that content really doesn't change from year to year. So it's done. And then I've got this resource that I can use year after year. So I think that's a kind of a great way to do it.
I love it. Oh man, I had Dr. Karen on, and she talked about I can't remember the word she used, that to say that you basically, assets. She used the word asset, that
Mhm.
you build, yeah, it's time consuming on the front end
Right.
of getting but when you know what fourth grade books are going to be, and it's always going to be those books, you
Mhm.
make your resources, and
Mhm.
now you have it for year to year to year. I
Yeah.
also am going to throw something in the chat too, to bring literacy alive. I had Julie Barber Bristol on as a guest, but then she also just recently did a 4-hour literacy kind of workshop through speech therapy PD. So I'm going to throw her name in the chat for everyone if you want to look into that. But wow, yeah, I love the way that you say use the vocabulary that they're going to be using.
Yeah.
I mean, how perfect is that? Because really, what are we here for? We're here for
Mhm.
accessing. And if I like, you use the word silo, so I'm going to use it. So we're not siloing our therapy to just the speech room. I love this. Oh, Marissa said that workshop is awesome. Well, Julie's a good friend of mine. Marissa, I'm going to let her know you said that. I also wanted to say we've got another question, which I really want your opinion on this. Angela, I'm throwing your name out there. I hope you're okay with that. Angela she stated that, and I agree with you, that it is difficult when districts refuse to assess for SLD for children until they're in 3rd grade. And that is so many years that they're missing out on supports. What is your opinion, and what can we do? Because if I'm not mistaken, if we suspect a delay or disorder, we have to assess.
You knew where I was headed.
I know, because I know you have some IDEA in there, so give it to us, sister.
Yeah. The federal law says, and federal law is something that every state must comply with. The federal law, IDEA, says that a child must be assessed in all areas of suspected disability. And it doesn't specify an age. So if they are in kindergarten and there is a suspected specific learning disability, that child should be assessed. Now, what becomes difficult is that for SLD, there are specific requirements that must be met, which say that there must be some sort of intervention, evidence-based intervention that shows a lack of progress. And that only applies to SLD. That's where RTI and multi-tiered systems of support came from. But so you would run into that problem if nothing's been done up until that point. So sometimes, like let's say you have a parent that comes in and requests an evaluation. So sure, you can request that evaluation, but if we sit down to have that eligibility meeting and there is not documentation of data,
Strategies and supports, yeah.
Yes, then you kind of run into a snafu in terms of eligibility, because you have to have all of those prongs available to be able to say that they meet the eligibility criteria. But that is a district's interpretation of the law. And, I think there are some guidance letters from DOE that you can find on the IDEA.gov website that speak to that specifically. And I was in a habit of, I would, get a bee in my bonnet and get aggravated at something that somebody had said in a meeting, and I'd get on the IDEA website and I'd start looking at those letters and I'd find the and so I'd just start printing them and keeping them in my binder. And so then we'd get in those meetings, and then the next time somebody said something, I'd go, actually, here's a letter from the Department of Ed, and it says that we cannot withhold, whatever it is. Whatever it is. But, I think there are resources that you could locate that would help you advocate in case by case situations. But, you certainly want to be respectful and you catch more flies with honey. So figuring out how to navigate that particular situation and picking the hill you want to die on, quite honestly, because it's a big beast.
I know there's so many things we fight for, which is we advocate for. Sorry, I
Yes.
shouldn't use fight.
Yes.
We're not fighting, we're advocating.
Yes.
And Marlene, I just popped in the chat talking about when we do have concerns with reading or math as well, other, core subjects.
Mhm.
She's asking, are you also saying we should be referring to a resource specialist? Or would we can't be the only ones providing those strategies for these students.
No, we can't be. I think it depends how your district works. Certainly the law says that well, I'll give you an example. So in Georgia, it was common practice for our school psychologists to be in the midst of an evaluation and come find us because the child did poorly on, certain subtests of the WISC, right? And so then we would have to evaluate, we would have to add that kid. However, that did not work the opposite direction. If I was in the midst of an evaluation and saw evidence of learning disability, I couldn't go to the school psychologist and say, you know what, I'm seeing some things, I'm suspecting it didn't work that way, which is so aggravating, but you work within the system that you have. I think you just figure out how your system works and how to navigate that system. If you are suspecting something and you go to your resource specialist or your resource teacher or however your district has it structured and say, you know what, I'm seeing this and this and this, and take a look at this, go and get their opinion. What do you think? And get that child on someone's radar so that they can advocate with you. And we can go in as a united front to say, we think this child needs more, get the teacher on board, kind of get everybody, circle the wagons, so to speak.
Thank you. Angela was asking about that quote you said about IDEA and where she can access that. Do you have that quote referenced? Or I was thinking I could maybe find it and send it to her.
Sure. No, I have it somewhere. Can I send? Do you have show notes or something that you?
Yeah, well, you know what? If you want to just send it to me, email me. Angela, I'm asking right now if you're comfortable. I'm just sent you oh, wait, I did it to everyone. Sorry, Angela. I meant to do that privately. Whoopsies. Angela, if you want to send me your private email, I will get that quote for you. But everyone's probably like, oh, I want it too. So if we can get it, I'll put it in the show notes. Oh, you know what? We can do it afterwards. I'm so sorry. I can get it for everyone. Look at me not being technical. We can get it to everyone. Anne will get it to me and I will make sure that we put it in the show notes afterwards. And you can access that afterwards and we'll make sure you have that. All right. I know when we talked before our episode, you were talking about Scarborough's reading rope, but I don't have we even gone there? What have we done?
We haven't.
And so shame on us. Shame on us.
We haven't. I was looking through some notes to see. Yeah, I don't see it. I can find it. I'll find the IDEA. I'll find that guideline. Yeah. So Scarborough's rope. So if you're familiar with the simple view of reading, which was a theory of reading proposed by Goff and Tumner back in the 80s, I believe, or 90s. But the simple view of reading basically says that the ability to recognize words multiplied by a person's listening comprehension ability equals reading comprehension. So it's not, the important thing to know about the simple view of reading and that it's not additive. So you're not adding word recognition and listening comprehension, because let's say you had one and you didn't have the other. If we added those, we would still get one, right? You'd still get a product. But if we're multiplying them and I have one and not the other, what's anything multiplied by 0?
If you, I know those that are just listening later, I just had a mind blow on that because you threw some math at me. But
Mhm.
okay, could you give me that math equation again? You said word
Sure.
recognition. How did you say?
Word recognition multiplied by listening comprehension equals reading comprehension. So that's the simple view.
I'm putting that in the chat right now.
Okay, so that either one of those components, either recognizing words, which is reading, or listening comprehension, that ability to understand, if either one of those is deficient, so we could call that a 0 if you wanted to put numbers on it.
Yeah.
When you
we do.
multiply anything by 0, you get 0. So reading comprehension will be impacted and possibly significantly. Okay, so that's the simple view of reading. Hollis Scarborough in 2001 took that idea, but developed, I think the imagery of this is just brilliant. So she turned it into a reading rope. And so she took the skills that make up word recognition. So that would involve phonological awareness, that would involve decoding and spelling, that would involve sight recognition, or like being able to read sight words, words that don't follow regular patterns. So those are all the strands that would go into word recognition. Then language comprehension also has individual strands, and those are things like vocabulary, your background knowledge, your knowledge of literacy, genres, different types of texts, language structures, your verbal reasoning. All of those different strands go together. And Scarborough's rope says those individual strands become increasingly more automatic and strategic. So the way that we think about language, listening comprehension, becomes more strategic. The way that we recognize words becomes increasingly automatic. And so if you think about a rope, as those things become increasingly strategic, increasingly automatic, the rope becomes tighter and woven. And so what that produces is a skilled reader, which is the ability to read and understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hard without a picture.
I know, but yeah, I put it in the chat. Well, so they would have the spelling for that.
Yeah. Well, and I would, to Angela's point, I think the simple view is not so simple. I think it's a very broad way to talk about something that is very complex. So that's, I would agree with you that it's not simple, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, just for those that are just going to be listening, when Angela, thank you. When we were talking about the simple view, she kind of indicated that she doesn't agree with it. And then Anna's kind of talking about, well, that's kind of, we have to also remember that was in the 80s, and so we're building on that and kind of going into the rope. Do you mind kind of reviewing that again, the components of that, like you?
Sure. I have a very bad picture, but I can show you. So you'll see up here, we've got language comprehension, and down here, we've got word recognition. And so you've got your components of word recognition, your spelling and decoding, your phonological awareness, your sight recognition, so sight words. And as these skills develop, they become increasingly automatic. That's why when we first begin to read, we really have to think about cat, and you may hear a little one that knows the sounds and has seen the word a few times, but they're still very purposefully sounding that word out. Whereas the more exposure they get to that word and to those letters and to the sounds that those letters make, eventually they can look at CAT and go, oh, cat. And it's not the slow, drawn out process. And then up here, listening comprehension, language comprehension. You've got background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, language structures. And this is your morphology, this is your syntax, this is your semantics, verbal reasoning, and your literacy knowledge. And as those skills develop, they become increasingly strategic. You know, the more we think about thinking and about language, kind of the easier it gets. Think about making connections between, you know, a vocabulary word that you already know well and a vocabulary word that's new. Like, you've got to make some new connections there to really understand that word. But once you learn it, you're becoming increasingly strategic. And so you're going to use that word more often. You may, you know, it just may come out. You don't have to think about it because you're becoming increasingly strategic. And then as those two things become more interwoven and more tightly woven, you have a skilled reader. So someone that's able to read the text and extract the meaning necessary from the text.
So those that are just listening, I'm going to spell it because I just popped it in my Google and it came right up and it's got a great visual for you. Scarborough, I'm going to spell it SCARBOROUGH, reading rope. I just popped it in. It's great visual. I think that's a wonderful representation.
Yeah, you have lots of options if you put in Scarborough's reading rope.
And really, when you're looking at all of those components, how many of those are within our scope and sequence?
Most of them.
Right?
Most. I could make an argument for probably all of them, but yeah.
Right. So basically, yeah, we are the true heroes here. Right. And those that are just listening and give herself a little pat on the back.
Tongue in cheek.
Absolutely deserves. No, we're always a little cheeky up here. We love it. We love it.
Yes. Reading comprehension is very complex. I see a comment in the chat. Yes. Reading comprehension, a very complex process. If it weren't, we wouldn't still be studying it. We would have already figured it out. But
I wonder, okay, someone's saying that they're not seeing it in the chat. I wonder if I somehow did it only to one person. I'm going to put it back in the chat.
You have Scarborough's reading rope about 4 comments up.
I'm going to put it back in one more time, just in case. And then Joan, let me know if you don't see that. Please. Unless I've already lost my Southern manners already. Well, okay. I'm going to wait and see if she's seen that, and then I can do it separately. I just want to make sure we've gotten to everything that you are wanting to share with us today. You've definitely walked us through all those little nuances of the evaluation that we need to be looking at. And really, if you're those red flags that we need to be looking at. Oh, okay. I'm also not seeing.
Okay, I just put the Google search in there so if you can see it. And it'll take you to all the different options for Scarborough's rope.
Okay. Thank you, Anne.
You're welcome.
Perfect. So hopefully everyone got to see that. I'm sad that people aren't seeing what I'm saying because, all the things I'm saying is so profound. I'm joking. But the point I wanted to kind of go back, because when you were talking about the red flags, wouldn't we look at the reading rope? Mm-hmm. And if those would be the red flags that could be indicative of a reading that could be impacting reading, that we just need to start that conversation and bring it to the table. Mm-hmm. That when, as SLPs, we know we have to have that impact statement, right? That we're seeing these deficits that we want to work on in speech because the impact could be on reading, which starts that conversation of, do we now need to look further?
Yes.
Is there, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely correct. The one of the things so part of the survey that we did looking at data sources that SLPs use to make eligibility decisions, we asked for, what data sources do you use? And the data source that was the lowest indicated was literacy assessment. Only 24% of the SLPs that took the survey said that literacy assessment was something that they did in their eligibility decision-making process. I think part of that is because maybe they were thinking of it as a separate thing. But, if you look at Scarborough's rope, you can get at all of these things through things that we've already talked about. You can look at word finding through the language testing that you're doing. You can look at vocabulary through the language testing that you're doing. You can look at phonological awareness and spelling through some of those assessments that you do. So there are ways to do it without adding something extra.
Because no one got time for anything extra, Ann.
Nope.
So
No, we don't.
No, we don't. So we need to be using what we're using,
Yeah.
but then in our minds, pulling out what we can see from our already robust
Yes.
evaluations that we're already doing, just to see if we need to be making some more referrals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, I love bringing the conversation to the table, and it might just be the beginning of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely.
Oh, we've got a question. If I had concerns, I could go to the OT site, the resource specialist. Thank you, Marlene. I think you're giving an answer. Sorry, that might not have made sense what I just said. Marlene, you can make, okay, we've got people in the chat. Sorry, I'm gonna confuse everybody if I'm saying stuff without context. Sorry. That's on me today. We've got great people today. Thank you, everybody that's jumping in the chat for us, and I love it. I'm just looking at our time, and I can't believe that we are getting to the end. This feels like it was just a minute. Is there anything else that we need to just make sure that we've touched on for our live audience and our listeners in the future? Any last?
SLPs are doing great work in the schools, and we are a resource to the students we serve. I'm just proud to be an SLP.
I am too. It's the best job. I mean, okay, it's the hardest job. It is the hardest job. Oh, and thank you, Kimberly. I think I might have missed this before. You mentioned some TPT resources. I think one of them I wrote down was Sweet Southern Speech.
Yeah, Sweet Southern Speech was just an account that I had looked at resources and then used that as the idea to create the social studies specific resources for my students. Yeah.
Oh, I see now. Okay. Let me see if everyone sees this. I think I found my problem. Hopefully everybody just saw that. I might have been answering just to Anne. Yay. Okay, now we're seeing it. Okay. All right. Thanks, Angela. It breaks Angela's heart how many kids that are that have speech services that can't read. Same girl. And we do need to advocate for them. And we need to be showing that we've got that data to prove that it is negatively impacting, and it can't just be us.
Right.
I think all of us SLPs would say we cannot shoulder, though they want us to, but it's not realistic, and it's not what's best for the students.
Right.
Everyone needs to get involved. We need to end. We'll get that statement about IDEA, because I think that's powerful, that we need to use if we have to evaluate for all suspected, and that is federal law.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I hear that over and over again. Well, let's just get them in. If we get them in, they can have all the supports. Well, do they?
Right. Well, and I think if we can be more descriptive in the way that we're assessing, the way that we're writing up that assessment, and then how we write those kind of speech only IEPs, if we can beef them up a little bit and not make that, I know sometimes mine have just been like, oh, well, it's just this. I just have to do it. Or you get in a time crunch. But the more descriptive you can be, and the more robust you can be in how you're describing things, kind of again lays the foundation for those who come after you to go, oh wow, they've been seeing this has been documented, we need to do something.
Right. And we're the first ones to say early intervention
Mhm.
is, our goal for early intervention is to get them at level by first grade. So why are we not? I mean, that's
Right.
the whole purpose.
Right.
You know what? That might be a great next episode about Anne getting you on about early intervention for reading.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not good.
Well,
Throwing it out there.
sure.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I have loved it again. Thanks, everybody. I know I can't get us too late because I know we've all got other things going on, but I just want to thank everyone for listening in and tuning in. And I cannot thank you enough. You're a wonderful speaker and sharing such wonderful information with us. We've been really blessed having you. So thank you so much. And thank you, those of you that have listened in. Thank you, everyone. I really look forward to seeing everybody again. And thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. For our School of Speech listeners, we have a special coupon code to receive $20 off any annual subscription to speechtherapypd.com. Head over there to get ASHA CEUs for listening to this podcast and all other episodes. The code is SCHOOL20. That is SCHOOL20. Hope to see you on our next episode. Also, please don't hesitate to tell us which topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. To get in touch, drop us a line in the comment section or send us a message on social media.